Have you ever wondered what occurred to the wives who adored fallen angels more than they cherished God's commandments? Get prepared to discover how their angelic spouses rebelled against heaven and how these courageous but naive women endured because of it. You'll learn why the Nephilim, the giant offspring born from this forbidden passion, were eradicated by a catastrophic flood, and how Angel Michael intervened to take control. But the greatest surprise is what he did to punish the wives afterward. Stay with us to find out how their souls became sirens and why they still haunt our tales today. You know how sometimes a single glance can alter everything? Well, this tale is about the biggest instance of love at first sight gone awry in history. Picture this. Way up in heaven, angels were performing their duties, singing God's praises, keeping the universe running smoothly. They had one responsibility: serve God. Simple, right? But then something occurred that wasn't meant to. These mighty angels looked down at earth and saw something that caused them to halt in their tracks. Mortal women. Now, these weren't just any women. They were stunning in a way that was different from anything in heaven. It was real, wrong, and human. Here's where things become intriguing. These angels, who were meant to be beyond earthly temptations, started experiencing something new. It was like a pull they couldn't define. Every time they gazed down, that sensation grew stronger. Their brilliant heavenly radiance began fading as thoughts they weren't supposed to have filled their minds. Down on earth, life continued as usual. Women were living their lives, working, laughing, loving. No awareness that above, mighty beings were breaching every rule just to observe them. But something unusual was occurring with these women too. They felt observed, special. Like something extraordinary was about to transpire. The air felt altered. You know that sensation right before a huge storm hits? That's what it was like. Everything was charged with energy, danger, and thrill, all mixed together. It was like the entire world was holding its breath, awaiting something immense to happen. The angels knew they were toying with fire. Every time they thought about leaving heaven, they remembered what they were supposed to be: God's servants, heaven's warriors. But that pull kept growing stronger. They began questioning themselves, asking things they'd never considered before. What if we could experience what humans feel? What if we could love like they do? Their hearts, which were designed to love only God, were now filled with longings they couldn't control. Every day, more angels joined in, watching the earth below. Each day, their determination weakened a little more. The decision was tearing them apart: stay true to their mission or give in to these new emotions. Everything was about to transform. Heaven and earth were never, but not the good kind. Imagine the most beautiful person you've ever encountered, then multiply that by 1,000. That's what these fallen angels looked like when they arrived. They didn't just walk, they hovered. They didn't merely speak, their words sang like music. Light appeared to dance around them, making everything else seem dull and dreary. When they entered villages and towns, everyone halted what they were doing. How could you not? It was like gazing at the sun, painful to look at, but impossible to look away. The women who saw them felt something they'd never experienced before. It wasn't just an infatuation or attraction. It was like being enchanted. These weren't just attractive strangers were never meant to merge like this. But these angels, who had stood by God's throne and seen the formation of stars, were ready to surrender it all for what? For a chance at human love. Little did anyone know, this choice would trigger a sequence of events that would shake both heaven and earth to their core. These angels were about to discover the hard way that some boundaries aren't meant to be broken, no matter how irresistible the reason. The moment these angels stepped onto earth, magic occurred. Passing through town, they were flawless in every way, or at least they appeared to be. Their skin radiated like moonlight. Their eyes contained all the stars of heaven. And when they smiled, well, that's when the real trouble began. But you know how they say if something appears too good to be true, it likely is? That's exactly what was happening here. These weren't just extraordinarily handsome men. They were angels who had turned their backs on heaven. And if you looked closely enough, you could see something wasn't entirely right. Their smiles concealed secrets darker than night. Their eyes, though beautiful, were ancient and profound in a way that no humans could possess. The women who encountered them felt drawn in like moths to a flame. It wasn't fair, really. How do you reject someone who literally glows with heavenly light, who knows everything about you before you even speak, who can promise you things no mortal man ever could? But here's the frightening part. The more time these women spent with the fallen angels, the more they changed as well. It's as though they caught some of that supernatural glow. They began to perceive things differently. Ordinary life wasn't sufficient anymore. Regular men seemed dull and unremarkable compared to these heavenly beings. The fallen angels knew precisely what they were doing. They selected the most alluring women, the ones who caught their attention from heaven. They used their heavenly powers to appear as everything these women had ever envisioned. It was like a fairy tale romance, but with a sinister twist. Every time one of these angels took a human wife, it sent shockwaves through both heaven and earth. These weren't ordinary marriages. They were unions that were never meant to occur. And the offspring that would result from these unions? Well, that's where our tale takes a darker turn. Now, let me tell you about the offspring of these forbidden unions. The Nephilim. Imagine a child being born. But instead of remaining small and adorable, they just keep growing and growing and growing. These weren't your typical kids. They were giants, with strength that could shift mountains and appetites that could empty villages. When a Nephilim walked, the earth trembled. When they spoke, their voices rumbled like thunder. They were born with their angel father's strength and their human mother's emotions, but none of the wisdom to manage either. Picture a toddler having a tantrum, but now make that toddler the size of a house. Terrifying, right? Cities lived in dread of these giants. Regular humans? They didn't stand a chance. The Nephilim took whatever they wanted, devoured whatever they wanted, and wrecked anything in their path. Some were as tall as trees, others even bigger. They weren't just large, they were intelligent too, and that made them even more dangerous. Up in heaven, God watched all of this unfolding. His flawless world was being turned upside down by these hybrid beings who were never meant to exist. His anger grew day by day as he saw how these giants terrorized his creation. The humans he adored so much were living in constant dread, hiding in their homes, praying for help. That's when heaven's greatest warriors, the archangels, knew they had to intervene. But even for them, this wasn't going to be simple. Fighting a Nephilim was like battling a force of nature. They were nearly unstoppable, and there were so many of them. The archangels gathered their forces. They understood this would be the biggest battle they'd ever fought. Michael, Gabriel, and the others strategized their attack carefully. They couldn't just rush in. These weren't demons they were battling. These were creatures with angel blood in their veins. But here's the advantage of having God on your side. You get backup plans, big ones. When the archangels realized even they might not be enough to halt the Nephilim, God decided to intervene personally. He had a plan that would reshape the world forever. A flood that would cleanse all the evil that had spread across the earth. The battle that followed was like nothing the world had ever witnessed. Heaven's armies against the formidable Nephilim, with the largest flood in history approaching. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the mountains, and rain began to fall. The Nephilim, for the first time ever, felt something they'd never experienced before. Fear. It was about to become evident to everyone, angels, humans, and Nephilim alike, that some lines should never have been crossed. But before we continue, have you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, do it right now because we publish incredible Bible content weekly, which will enhance your understanding of the Bible and the events discussed. What are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now. Now, have you ever seen storm clouds gather so dark that day turns to night? Well, multiply that by 1,000,000. That's how it began the day God decided enough was enough. The sky didn't just darken, it turned black as ink. The air became so heavy you could hardly breathe. At first, people didn't think much of it. Rain was typical, right? But this was unlike anything before. The raindrops were thick and heavy, like tears from heaven itself. They didn't fall. They crashed down hour after hour, day after day. The rain just kept falling. No pauses, no letting up, just endless water descending from an angry sky. The mighty Nephilim, who had terrorized everyone for so long, began to look frightened for the first time. These giants, who could crush boulders with their bare hands, couldn't do anything against the rising water. They attempted climbing the highest mountains, but the flood just kept rising higher. Their power meant nothing now. Nature itself had turned against them. You could hear the screams everywhere. People pleading for mercy, crying out to heaven. The fallen angels watched helplessly as their children, these mighty beings they had created, struggled against the flood. But there was nothing they could do. This was God's punishment, and no power in heaven or earth could stop it. Amidst all this chaos, one boat floated safely, Noah's Ark. Imagine being on that ark, hearing the storm rage outside, feeling the waves toss you around like a toy. Inside were the only humans and animals that would survive this global cleanup. They could hear the desperate cries of those outside dying, but they couldn't help. This was God's plan, and they had to trust it. The water rose higher and higher. First, it covered the fields, then the forests, then the hills. Even the tallest mountains vanished under the endless waves. The Nephilim, those powerful giants who once seemed invincible, were now just another thing for the flood to sweep away. Their extraordinary strength couldn't save them from drowning. The fallen angels could only watch from their chains as everything they had built, everyone they had loved, disappeared under the water. Their perfect children, their human wives, the cities they had helped construct, all gone. The world they had corrupted was being washed clean. For 40 days and 40 nights, water fell from the sky. When it eventually stopped, the world was just one vast ocean. No mountains, no valleys, no cities, just water as far as the eye could see. The only sign of life was Noah's Ark, floating alone on the endless sea. When the waters finally started receding, they revealed a completely different world. Everything the Nephilim had built was gone. It was like pressing a giant reset button on Earth. But for some, especially the wives of the fallen angels, an even worse punishment was about to begin. When the floodwaters finally disappeared, you'd think the worst was over. But for some, it was just the beginning. Remember those women who fell in love with the fallen angels? They survived the flood, but perhaps that wasn't a blessing after all. Picture this. You've loved someone with all your heart, someone flawless and powerful, only to watch them be dragged away in chains. That's what happened to these women. Their angel husbands, once so mighty and beautiful, were now bound in darkness. Some were chained in deep valleys, others trapped in spiritual prisons. They couldn't help their wives anymore, couldn't shield them, couldn't even embrace them. The wives were left alone to face what they'd done. Some of them broke down completely. Imagine realizing that your decisions helped bring about the end of the world. That's a heavy burden of guilt to carry. They fell to their knees, pleading with God to forgive them. They cried until they had no tears left. But not everyone felt remorse. Take Nama, for example. Beautiful, proud Nama. Even after everything, she wouldn't back down. She had become drunk on her own beauty and power, using them to lead others astray. Even now, she stood tall, refusing to admit she was wrong. Her pride became her prison. God's punishment was inventive and cruel. These women were transformed into sirens. You know those creatures who lure sailors to their doom? Yeah, that was them. Condemned to be beautiful but deadly, just like the angels they had loved. Forever drawing others into destruction, just as they had been drawn in themselves. The psychological damage was overwhelming. These women had to live with crushing guilt, knowing their choices had helped ruin the world. Some went mad with grief. Others became hollow shells of who they once were. The weight of what they'd done was too heavy to bear. And their angel husbands, chained up in their prisons, could sense everything their wives were enduring. They could feel their pain, their despair, their madness, but they couldn't do anything about it. Talk about torture. The angels who remained faithful to God were given a new task, watching over this transformed world. They had to ensure nothing like this ever occurred again. They observed the sirens, once their sisters-in-law, singing their deadly songs. They watched humanity rebuild, trying to forget the terror of the flood. It was a new era for everyone. The world had been washed clean, but the scars remained. The faithful angels kept their distance now, watching but never intervening. They had learned their lesson. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, no matter how tempting the reason.
If you enjoyed the content, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with friends and family who may be interested in exploring the profound stories in the Bible. We would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Leave a comment below and share your perspective on this topic. Thank you for watching.